Oh, hi. Welcome to Aquata Zoo, where we like to nerd out over all things zoo and aquarium related. I'm l.semple, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about data-driven empathy in leadership. This topic came up, and I think it's kind of important to look at from a couple of different angles for the sake of this podcast, I suppose. And it is something that is really important for success as a leader and success as animal care professionals. So I wanted to talk about it for a little bit. So it'll be this week and next week, but it came about because I'm working on my dissertation. There's a lot of reading involved, scientific papers, a lot of data. My study is going to be quantitative, and it's just a lot. So my brain is kind of going in a particular direction right this moment, and I figured, why not take advantage of it? Let's talk about how we use data and how we can incorporate that into our people skills, our empathy, and make changes based on the data. Because it doesn't seem like it makes sense. Data-driven empathy. Oh, P.S. I also say it both ways, data and data. Sorry. I just caught myself doing it. Anyway, it seems like these terms don't work together. However, the way they are used is very helpful in making meaningful change that benefits people and benefits animals, kind of depending on how you're applying it. Essentially, this is how we know that the changes that we're making, trying to deal with a problem that we're seeing or something like that, actually has impact. We are making a change and it is having noticeable effects, right? You don't necessarily know that it's happening unless you use some kind of method to track it sometimes. It's easy to overlook or overestimate even the impact of changes that you're making if you don't have data to back it up. So let's talk a little bit about data-driven empathy when it comes to leadership. Why would we want that? Why would we care? There are a lot of companies, a lot of organizations that are trying to figure out what's going on with their staff, their productivity, and things like that from one side or the other, right? From the number side or from, I guess, the people watching the empathy, I would say, vibes side. So you've got these two kind of opposing viewpoints of the same situation, and you're getting different information based on how you're approaching your investigation on what's going on, right? So when you're looking at straight numbers, you're looking at a piece of the puzzle, right? And same for if you're going to look at the empathy side only, the emotional side only. You're looking at pieces of the puzzle, the bigger picture, and it can get very intimidating as to how you can really look at this and come up with some kind of meaning. So as a leader, if you're looking at your situation, your team, and you're trying to figure out what's going on and what you need to fix based on numbers alone, you may be misinformed, right? And it also depends very heavily on which numbers you're looking at. So let's say you've got a team and you're seeing a lot of turnover. That's a problem, and you're starting to wonder what's going on. Well, if you're looking at turnover numbers only and trying to just do things that are aiming to retain people, you may very well be looking at the wrong thing, right? It takes a while to get to the point where you've got somebody who's decided to leave their job. And there were probably hundreds of things that happened in the time leading up to that, the weeks, the months, the years, that led them to that decision. It may have nothing to do with you. It may just be that maybe their spouse got a job somewhere else, they have to leave, they can't stay and have this job here. That's simple enough. But if you're seeing that in your data, you're having high turnover, and it's not situations like that, right? It's situations where people who've been there for 5-10 years are just like, I can't do this anymore, I'm leaving. You're looking at a number. And technically the number is the same whether that person left because their spouse is having to relocate or because they just can't handle the issue anymore. So the problem isn't the turnover. Because on one hand, it's somebody making the decision because their spouse, their life situation has changed, right? And they have to go with it. The other one is there's something wrong in the workplace. But if you're just making changes to kind of improve retaining your staff, that's not fixing the problem. The problem is elsewhere. You see what I mean? So when you're looking at numbers, understand what numbers you need to be looking for to get a better idea of what's going on with your team and how to respond. And if you're looking at numbers for turnover, let's say, since it's an easy thing to visualize, and you're seeing that you've got low turnover, that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got the perfect situation either. So you're going to have a little bit because life happens and people have to leave jobs. Maybe somebody leaves to go start a family, whatever their reasoning is, they decide to leave the job. But then you've got all these people who decide to stay. That doesn't necessarily mean that things are perfect where you are, right? They could be making a horrible, toxic work environment for each other, and they could be suffering all at the same time, but maybe your organization's the only kind of game in town. Like, this happens with zoos and aquariums quite frequently. These facilities are few and far between in much of the country in the US. And so if you are doing the work that you love and you find yourself in a zoo or aquarium that's not quite what you had hoped it would be as far as the culture and the climate of the workplace, right? Then you risk either just leaving the field entirely or you just stay there and suffer. A lot of people choose to stay there and suffer. And as a leader, you should be very concerned. Even though your numbers, your turnover rate is telling you that everything is fine, you can look a little deeper beyond the numbers and tell that everything is not fine and that there needs to be some corrections made. And this is what kind of leads me to the empathy part, right? If you're just dealing with empathy only without any numbers, that also can lead to a kind of skewed view of what's actually happening. I feel when you're making changes based on your empathy, your emotions, the vibe of what's going on, you end up kind of spinning your wheels a lot or trying to figure out exactly what you should do and either not making changes or making the wrong changes because you're just trying stuff out, right? Like, you don't have any numbers to help you kind of figure out and give you a more nuanced look at what's happening. So if you realize that you've got a bunch of coworkers who aren't happy and you're trying to figure it out and you don't kind of look at a little bit more of the objective data that you could have, you're just kind of floundering a little bit, right? You get a suggestion from somebody, sure, it would be nice if we had this, and then you get that thing and it doesn't change stuff. Like, you're wasting resources and time trying to figure out why everyone is upset without making like meaningful, pointed changes that actually solve the problems that they're experiencing. In one facility where I worked, we had an issue where people were just being so passive aggressive in notes to each other that it was ruining the entire team's dynamic, right? And everybody was upset. Nobody could really figure out why until we switched to a new record keeping system. So people were not able to write each other passive aggressive notes about the care of what's going on. They would have to, because that would be part of a document that would be in our record keeping system forever, right? And the passive aggressive notes were just happening on margins of paper, handwritten passive aggressive notes. But now we're entering these records in as an official record of what was happening for that day. Nobody wants to assign their name to that and have that be a part of an animal record or a care record, something that is going to be looked up and looked at later on, years down the line. Nobody wants that. So that stopped the passive aggressive note taking, but it was an accident, So it was because we needed to switch our record keeping from paper and pen to this digital actual record keeping software that people finally started editing, I guess, what they needed to say and actually having conversations with each other rather than writing these passive aggressive notes. I was relatively new to this organization at the time, and it absolutely blew my mind that people were writing each other notes like this. I could never. It was the most juvenile thing I'd ever seen. And so I was fortunate that I came in at the time that we were switching from this paper and pen record keeping to this digital record keeping to tamp down on the outstandingly inappropriate records that had been kept for years on paper, because the only people who would see them really were the keepers themselves, this small team in this small area of the larger organization. Nobody ever really else saw those notes. But once they were in the digital record keeping software, anyone could see those notes, and nobody wanted to be that person who always left passive aggressive notes. So if somebody would have, like, they did try to fix this issue and tell people, like, stop writing these terrible notes in your daily logs. It's not appropriate. It's not helpful. Like, just communicate like adults. Tell each other what you need to tell each other. You know, ask for help. You know, all these things. They were trying to figure out what was going on and why everybody was so mad, but they never really narrowed it down to these terrible notes just setting people off for the day. You know what I mean? Like, you walk in first thing in the morning, and the first thing you have to do is look at what yesterday's notes said. And it would be these awful notes directed at you as being the next one coming in. And it would just ruin your day right off the bat. So they knew there was a problem. They just didn't know how bad of a problem this was. And it just happened to be that the record keeping system changed, and therefore the problem was vastly reduced. Did it solve all the problems? Heck no, it did not. But it really helped, you know? And so that is one of the most clear pictures in my mind of leadership trying to figure out what was going on, but not having any data to back it up and not figuring it out until well after this whole thing sorted out. I didn't even realize it at the time, other than the fact that I didn't think that people should be writing notes like this to each other. But, you know, you can't control other people and what they're going to do. You just have to make it easier for them to do the right thing, right? So accidentally changing this record-keeping situation made it so that people would write more appropriate notes because those were there forever and anyone could look them up at any time and you could access them from everywhere. And so nobody wanted to be the person who left the really terrible notes for their coworkers and just set everyone off. So I hope this is kind of making sense. If you get too far into the data as a leader, you may be measuring the wrong thing, looking at the wrong data. You might be looking at lagging indicators, which, you know, is like the turnover rate, rather than anticipatory type indicators, which might be something more like a survey to see where everyone is right now, well before they make the decision to leave, right? Or it could be something like asking around, like, if you could change anything that would make your job easier right now, what would it be? You know, it makes it harder to remove the obstacles and make it easier for people to work rather than trying to react after they're already gone. You know what I mean? Those lagging indicators, though they're tempting because they're very clear, we need to, like, incorporate a little bit more emotion, a little bit more empathy into our data gathering so that we can actually make those meaningful changes before they have been pushed too far. And likewise, if you're too far into the empathy and the emotion and just checking in with people and seeing how they're doing, there's a lot of time wasted, and there are changes that are necessary, but it's really hard to figure out which changes those should be, which ones will make the most impact and actually fix some of the problems that we're experiencing. Because a lot of the time people they can't even articulate what they're feeling and what they need. And sometimes they might misidentify it. So you could come and ask them, what do you need to change? And they could tell you a thing that might help, but that turns out once you've changed it, it could just be a contributing factor to what's actually the problem, which is something else entirely, when the data would help you to identify that. Which is why I make the argument for data-driven empathy, because you need a little of both to be able to figure out what's wrong, what needs to be changed, and how to deal with it. And I should note, even if you're not a leader, you can get into this stuff and make some changes that actually benefit everyone. You can do this even without being a leader, is what I'm saying. So just don't write it off because if you're not a leader, you don't need to know any of this kind of stuff. It's good to kind of keep in mind as you're watching what's happening. Because I know that even though I didn't understand fully and I couldn't articulate what I was seeing, I knew that something wasn't quite right in some workspaces where I've been. And it isn't until I've really been thinking about this, writing this dissertation and analyzing some of the stuff that I'm like, oh, now I see what was going on. Now I understand what needed to change or steps that could have been taken had somebody known what to look for and known what to measure and known how to react to the data that they got. But this can also be very simple. I will give you an example. I was not a leader at the time, but there was a point where we had to make a change, again, with record keeping. This is kind of a headache for animal keepers, I will tell you. We know it's important, but it's kind of a pain to do because there's 1 billion things to do in the day, and it's hard to sit down and just do your record keeping. But I digress. We had an issue with training not being recorded properly, training sessions, the information and how the training was going was not being recorded accurately and in a timely manner after we would do a group training session. And so I struggled with that for quite some time, trying to get the people who were helping me train animals, because we were training a whole bunch of animals at one time. After those sessions, those people would walk away, go about back to their business and go do their work that they had to do. And I could only keep track of basically what I trained. And so even though all of the animals involved were under my care as the primary keeper, I was losing all these documents and these training sessions and all the information. And it was really detrimental for the animals because it was hard to keep track of where they were in their training. So the next day, the next trainer would come in and be like, what happened yesterday? And I had no idea because I was focusing on the animal that I was training and I couldn't focus on all of the other animals that were getting trained at the same time. I'm not going to lie. I was pretty frustrated by this all happening because it revolved around the care of the animals that I was assigned. And I wanted to make sure they had the best care. And it was just getting confusing for the trainers coming in because we didn't always train the same animal every day. And animals were not making progress. Their behavior was breaking down. This is all part of training, right? And so I finally stopped moping about it and getting frustrated and just talked to everybody about it. Like, what is the real issue here? What is the problem? Like, why can't we seem to get this together? Like, walk me through your day. After you walk out of the training session, where are you going and what are you doing? And so people were telling me, oh, I've got this feeding that I got to do at, 20 minutes later. And I got to make sure that I've got the food set and everything ready to go. And I've just got more that I got to do. Somebody else would say, oh, I have a meeting that's scheduled right after that feeding and I have to make it there. And on and on and on. After talking to everybody is very busy. And I totally understood that. The issue was they didn't feel like they had enough time to get it all done, right? Like, we're washing dishes, they're running out of the room after that training session, and then they have to get back to their own tasks. So I asked for help with that from my leader, and so I ended up setting up a laptop in the hall right next to the exhibit that was the quote-unquote issue, where trainers would walk out of the room with the exhibit in it, where they just finished training, and then I would stand there by that computer and collect their dishes and tools and things and point at the computer and tell them to log their information right then, as soon as they walked out of there. And it worked because I would then take their dishes and things and wash those and clean all that up so they didn't have to do that part, but they had time then to do the data entry that I needed them to do. And so this kind of evolved over time. It wasn't perfect because I didn't like being stuck with all the dishes either, and I still needed to enter my information in. So we kind of turned it into like a equal partnership thing. We got the timing down just right so that not everybody's waiting in line to wash their dishes. Not one person is stuck washing all of the dishes. It was just kind of almost like a shift thing. Like, the first group to come out of the training session, because not all the animals would finish at the same time, they would come in, drop their dishes off, do their data entry, and then go back to wash their dishes, finish up, and then the next trainer groups that would come out, they would just basically kind of trade off and rotate who was washing dishes versus who was doing data entry. Because I really only had one computer, only one person could be doing data entry at a time. But somehow that made it easier for them to do, because we were sharing the effort of washing the dishes, we were sharing the effort of logging that information immediately, and I basically made it difficult to ignore. But putting a station right there next to the exhibit made it way easier for people to do the work that they needed to do right away. And even if they had to run off and do something else, they could come right back to that little workstation and log what they needed to for their stuff as well as for mine, the animals of mine that they just trained. They were welcome to use that workstation whenever they wanted to, honestly. They just needed to make the time for it. And sometimes it was difficult because we shared computers. So when you go to the office to work on one of the shared computers, there was a good chance that all of them were taken by somebody else, they were all in use. And so having that workstation there helped everybody, because it was just another point that people could use to enter their data or even check their email or whatever. And then it was just very difficult to ignore it. And so they kind of just naturally incorporated it into their day. And I didn't yell at anybody if they didn't enter in their training session, just because I know everybody's busy. So they would run off, go do what they need to do. Eventually they would come back, because this was in a hall that was very busy, that everybody would come by. So at some point they would see the work computer, the little laptop that was set up in the hall, and they would say, "Oh, I need to do my data entry." So it was like self-reminding as well, because it was just like out there in the middle of everything in one of the busiest areas of our building. So it was getting used all the time, and people would see that thing and just automatically think about data entry and like entering their records and training sessions, and whether it was doing their maintenance for the day or their training or whatever else data-wise they had to put in there, they would enter it in at that little workstation kiosk thing, just because it was convenient and it was not being taken up usually by other people in the office. So it was an easy change that got to the core of it, just because it was time that was the issue. It wasn't, just defiance over the fact that they didn't want to do the data entry. They did care about the animals, but they just didn't have the time. So working with everybody and making it so that they had the time, I took their dishes and made it so that they had time, because while they weren't washing their dishes, they could go enter their training session data. So it like made it a no-brainer. And people ended up just kind of incorporating it into their day. Having that kiosk there also saved time, because people could just run by really quick, enter in what they had to, and then keep on moving. It was in a hallway, it was in the middle of everything, it was very visible, and so it was just an easy way to encourage people to do more of their data entry, because there was a dedicated laptop set up for anyone to use anytime for that purpose. And again, we made those changes when I was not a leader. So I just want you to know that you can do this kind of stuff without being in charge of a team. But you just need to really get down to what the issue is and look into the data. For me, the issue was time. They didn't have enough time. And so I had to make it make sense. I had to find the time, which meant me taking on the dishes and things, but it really didn't cost that much time in the end. Like, yes, it was a little time consuming and bumpy in the beginning, but after people started kind of getting the rhythm of it, it was no time sunk at all. Like, we all incorporated it in. We just started rotating, like who was washing dishes versus who was finishing their training session versus who was entering their training session data. So it made it very natural, very easy, and it just wasn't a problem anymore. If I hadn't gotten the data, or I had been like looking for the vibes, I probably would have assumed that people were just kind of being lazy or kind of being defiant about doing their data entry. They had prioritized incorrectly, and I would have probably tried to get them some kind of time management training to help them with that, which is It's kind of based on time. The issue was a little bit based on time, but that was not the primary factor, right? It didn't work quite like that. It's not because they didn't care, and it's not because they're lazy, and it's not because they just didn't want to. It was just like literally there are not enough minutes in the day. And so we had to help find the minutes. And it just kind of started with, let me take your dishes while you're standing here without your dishes and I am washing them. Please go ahead and enter your data. And that's how it started. And it just got better from there. We got a little bit more efficient. We were rotating around who was doing what at any given time. It did not take any more time to do the data entry because of the way that the training session went, and not all animals finished at the same time. So it kind of naturally meandered towards everyone being able to do their session and enter the data without spending extra time. And I made it a rule that it was okay to drop your dishes and go if you seriously did not have the time. Granted, we kept kind of tabs on that so that wasn't the same people dropping dishes and walking away so that everybody else had to wash them. But ultimately, as it being my exhibit, I was responsible for making sure that the dishes were done and everything was cleaned up in the end. But, people don't like to put all that on one person. So I fortunately worked with a really great team who did not want that to happen. Like, yeah, I was ultimately responsible for that, but they didn't like having me just sitting there washing dishes all afternoon when they could participate and do the data entry and help out, and we're all helping each other. So I'm just asking you to keep an eye out for this. Whether you're a leader, whether you're not, just keep an eye out for this. If you're seeing changes in people and you're not sure what's going on, don't assume you understand, and just start asking questions. What's changed? What's going on? What is this? What's different? Why is it suddenly, a different feeling in here? And look at your data about what has changed or what is going on, what people are saying is the issue. If you're seeing a whole bunch of data points that all point towards this one thing being the problem, investigate that problem. If you're just assuming that everybody's in a mood, that's not helpful. You're not going to fix anything like that. And you're going to waste a lot of time and resources trying to pinpoint the problem when your data could be telling you exactly what's going on if you're looking at the right factor, I suppose. Don't wait until people are walking out the door, they're doing their quiet quitting, they're just giving up on life. Don't wait until that point. Please start your investigation before you get to that point. Otherwise, it's too late. Trying to figure out what's going wrong in an exit interview is the wrong time. They might be very honest with you, and it might help. If you have no idea, then by all means, ask all the questions in someone's exit interview, but just understand that person is kind of lost to you already, and you're not going to be able to convince them to stay or come back or whatever, right? So it's really important that you keep an eye on the data as well as the emotion, because we're dealing with people, right? In animal care, this is kind of what we do with animals. We're keeping an eye on what data points we're seeing, as well as the behavior and the general feeling that you're getting from watching animals, because they can't speak to you. They can't tell you what's wrong. They can't indicate to you what the problem is without you being very watchful over them. They might be kind of showing you what's up, but they can't tell you. And that means that you need to be very watchful for what they're indicating to you, because they don't have the capacity to literally tell you. Which we often forget in animal care. It translates over to people care very easily, but we forget that. I've watched it happen a million times. People who are great at animal care that are not great at leadership because they don't equate them in their mind or use the same skills that they have for the other purpose. And so that's why I'm bringing up this data-driven empathy, because it is used with animals as well as with people. You need the data, you need the vibes to come up with a good solution for the problems that you may be seeing. Okay, if you have any questions about that or any other leadership or management things or zoo and aquarium stuff, let me know. Write it up in an email. You can send it to me at aquatazoo@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, and I hope that you do, don't forget to follow or subscribe on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get all of that sweet, sweet content as soon as it releases. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can find me at patreon.com/aquatazoo. And if you'd like to take a vacation and you don't know where to start, I happen to be a personal vacation advisor with Magical Vacation Planner, and I would love to help you out. It does not cost you anything extra. The links are in the show notes. Okay, thanks for listening. I heart your faces. Okay, bye.